you talk about these ideologies and, sexual liberation ideologies, like feminism is a good example. You talk a lot about feminism in the book. And, I think feminism is a little hard to really get a handle on because there's such a wide spectrum of what, kind of goes under the rubric feminism. So yes, there are these academic feminists, especially from, kind of the early second wave feminism that were super like, hostile to heterosexuality, hostile to motherhood, make a lot of very, very extreme statements. I mean, even someone like Betty Friedan, who, qualifies as, a moderate, I think in some respects, you quoted her as saying that motherhood is inherently a bane and things like that. But then you've got, I think the majority of women in society who don't have that sort of, they would call themselves feminists, but they aren't necessarily embracing all of that. To them, it's like, hey, I just want equal opportunity, right? It's the idea that feminism is the radical idea that women are human beings, or it's like, that men and women are equal. I'm not going to get discriminated against in my job, et cetera. So like, it's a label that encompasses a large amount of thinking in this world. And how do we make sense of that? And how do you make sense of it and figure out which streams, are doing what?
Yeah, well, this is one of the more controversial things I think I do in the book. I basically break it down into feminists and not feminists. And I probably push people into the feminist category who wouldn't call themselves that, given the way I define it. So one of the interesting things in writing the book was trying to figure out what feminism was about. Like, if I could give you the whole world you wanted, what would you as a feminist take? How would you describe the world you want? And I mined the works of the early feminist thinkers, Simone de Beauvoir, Friedan, Kate Millett, Shuli Firestone. And the things that they said were they wanted to erase the differences between men and women. They called it end patriarchal socialization. Cultivate independence among women, emotional and economic, from the family, and then end sexual taboos. These were the three goals that feminism set for itself. And so if you take those goals as what defines feminism, that's what I take to be feminism. Someone who wants more choices, the question, like, that's a cliche. That's a substitute for thinking. What does it mean to want more choices? Do you want them because you want to be independent? Or do you want them because you'd like to have balance in your life? Right? If you want choices because you want to be an independent person without any encumbrances or duties, that's the feminist claim. If you want choices because you want to achieve balance between some individual fulfillment that you can get from serving humanity or having a job of some sort, and balancing that with a family life or communal life of some sort, then that's not a feminist, right? So you have to press on some of these questions. What do you mean by equality? When you say women is a radical notion, or feminism is a radical notion that women are human beings, what do you mean by human beings? Does that mean you have warts and all? That you make mistakes and you might need another person because that's what a human being is? Or is it, I'm a human being and that means I'm a transcendent being without any limits placed on my life? So I find the cliches that are used to define feminism to be a substitute for thinking about precisely what those goods serve. And when you press, you either become a feminist, as I define it, or you become, and that's a pitiful word, but I call it a womanist on the other end. That is someone who's going to be defined at least partly by her sex, partly by being dependent on another person, and partly by some sexual modesty.
Yeah, when I read or see some of the early second wave feminists, especially like a Betty Friedan, the problem that has no name, the unfulfilled 50s housewife. And I think about these ideologies, they really seem to originate in societal transformations, in my view, that come out of sort of industrialization and sort of post-industrial society. Like industrial society seems to be the age of ideologies. Marxism comes along. we enter this sort of ideological age because industrialization, and to an even greater extent, post-industrial world, represented a radical transformation of the world in which, things like the family were embedded. I mean, pre-industrial society, the family was really part of a economically productive household. It was generally a rural, agricultural, self-sufficient household. So it had to provide all its own food, had to provide all its own health care, provide its child care, provide education. Often it was just vocational training. Fathers and mothers would pass along their profession to their children, all the skills that you needed to survive in the world. It was your social safety net, in a certain sense, was having this extended family. It was even community governance. If you think about the old New England town meetings, and the family or the household was really a highly economically productive, functional unit. And with industrialization, we move away from that, and we end up in a world where all of the things that the family used to do is now provided either by the marketplace. We earn our money in the market, we purchase things in the market, or it's provided by the government. Government run schools, government run this. And the thing is, family doesn't really do what it used to do functionally. And therefore, to a great extent, the emotional bond, the relational intimacy, that's basically the only thing left, right? And so I do think you end up in a situation where, like in the 50s, a lot of these housewives ended up in subdivisions on Long Island. Maybe they didn't even have a car during the day because their husband took it to work. They didn't have anything to do. And they were sort of robbed of a lot of the high-value functions that they performed in this old regime where they were economically productive members of society. Ann Douglas, in her book, The Feminization of American Culture, calls it the disestablishment of women, that women essentially lost their function, and they were sort of left in this environment, where some people did very well. Some people loved that environment, but others, particularly high talented women who didn't have an outlet for their talents, really did not thrive, and were kind of complaining about this, this problem that has no name. To what extent is our problems of the family really not a problem of maybe ideology, but of like the fact that the family, what does it really do today compared to what it did, in the early 1800s before industrialization came along?
Yeah, I mean, I am familiar with that argument, and there's got to be truth to what you say. On the other hand, I think that when you look at something like the 1950s family, you'd have to say that if maybe some upper class women were dissatisfied with it, it was very good for the working class. When you look at the family stability of the working class in the 50s and 60s, really, it's very much mirrors the upper class. Something like 90% of children would have been born to lower middle class and lower class people, would have been born to intact families and lived most of their life in intact families. And that number now for the upper class is still about the same. That is, I mean, it's about 85%. It was 95% back then, but now the number's 30% for the lower class. So the destruction that feminism wrought hasn't ultimately changed the lives of those upper class women over much. In some ways, they have fewer children, they get married later, marriage is less central to their lives, but just as a social function, they still have children, stay married, raise them, are interested in raising them. Maybe they have help in raising them. But the destruction that was wrought, I think, on the family is an element of why, the lower class Americans are having such a hard time now. There's other causes of it. The loss of manufacturing jobs is another part of it, the stable economy that came with it. But I don't know what comes first, a stable economy or a stable marriage. I mean, they can actually help one another out. So there is something to the idea that we, as the Marxists might say, change the mode of production. You're going to change the form of the family. And I think ultimately there is more than a little truth to that. But the ideologies that we use to explain that situation to ourselves have also exacerbated the problems. And so I think Friedan's ideology, that is her explanation why women were like taking depressants or tranquilizers, as they were then called, and drinking a lot and not satisfied in their lives, was feminism. And it's not clear to me that that's the answer.
Yeah. I think about it's hard for me because like not living in like the 50s and the 60s, it's really hard to get a picture of what life was like then. I don't know if you ever read Alan Ehrenhalt's book, The Lost City, about Chicago. He talks about, this. It gives you this picture of like very tight knit communities, very high social capital, and yet, at the end of the day, also very repressive in a lot of ways. There was sort of you were basically forced to live, kind of in a way, and it's like you sort of had a little bit of choice. It's like you picked your bar, and once you picked it, that was your bar, and you were there, right? And all those structures, all those structures were blown up. Well, the mean old nuns, there's no more mean old nuns in the Catholic schools anymore. All that stuff is gone, and he makes the argument that we really lost a lot when that happened. But I do wonder, like, would I have wanted to live in the era of the organization man? If I did, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. So I kind of wonder myself sometimes, like, how would I really want to live in those environments, even myself personally?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I read that book, but I do remember reading it, Aaron, and saying to myself, he thinks that feminism ruined Chicago's neighborhoods. And that must be a serious argument. And I think it's one of the things that does it. There's losses and gains. There's losses and gains from these changes. The sense of belonging and community that comes with people actually being in a home and living life together and sharing it with others, like that means that there's going to be less freedom. I think those two things go together. But I think there's excesses on each side, and human flourishing, or I don't know what the right standard here. Less human misery, I think, is the standard that I would adopt. Can be found in each ditch, and the rolling revolution, I would say, has taken us into the individualistic ditch.